of the more common ones. All of them eat insects, as all these pictures indicate. They eat everything from roaches and beetles and termites to moths and katydids and the cicadas. I'm trying to remember what those things, the 7-year locust things. They eat grasshoppers and locusts as well. They eat all types of mosquitoes. And many of the insects that bats consume are considered agricultural pests. So farmers and agriculturists and even people in the beef raising industry, the cattle industry, or people who are raising horses are very, very interested nowadays in helping propagate bat populations on their land to help keep the insect populations down so that they don't have to use poisons and toxins on their animals or on their crops. Now, that's important to all of us. Maybe you're not a farmer, but if you eat products that a farmer grows, and we all do, we want it to be as clean as possible, don't we? We don't want to eat something that's been laced with pesticides and chemicals to get rid of the bugs. The problem with the farmer is that he can't sell produce that has insect damage because nobody wants to eat something that looks ugly. I last year grew a whole bunch of tomatoes. You know the ugly tomato things? You know, you can buy them in the store once in a while. They're really horrible looking, but they taste fabulous. They're heirloom species of tomatoes. And they look horrible, but you can't sell those to a grocery store market. People want pristine, beautiful, little round, red, shiny tomatoes. There better not be a wormhole in it. And so farmers are more or less forced to treat their crops with chemicals in order to reduce the insect damage. And we can definitely see a difference when farmers use bats and other natural insectivores to help control those populations of insects. Now, Commissioner Bonilla mentioned earlier the mosquito fish. That's also named, another name for that is Gambusia. Gambusia are a native fish that used to be rampant. It was a little tiny guppy looking thing. And they used to be in every waterway, every puddle, every pond in Florida. They've been poisoned out by pesticides. So now we're raising Gambusia in laboratories and we're trying to reintroduce them into waterways where unfortunately a lot of times the pollution loads are going to kill the fish before it has a chance to really fulfill its destiny and eat a lot of bugs and a lot of larvae. So we got to be careful about the pesticide thing. It's way more pervasive than just what's on your food. It's in all of our water and soil, so we need to be careful about how much of this we use. Okay, so everybody says, all right, yeah, this all sounds really interesting, but where did bats used to live, Sherry, before you started putting up bat houses? Everyone asks me that. Well, where did bats used to live when there weren't people here to put up bat houses? Well, they used to live in the trees that we all cut down. 500 years ago, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, Florida was riddled with trees of all types, shapes, sizes, and colors. Trees that were old growth forests in virtually every landscape, and today, most of that's gone. Estimates today estimate that there's less than 10% of the natural native forest left in Florida. That's pretty low. And if you start talking about scrub habitat, it's less than 2% that's left. That's even lower. So that's what's problematic with bats as well as birds and lots of other wildlife. When you destroy or you alter or you change or you manipulate the habitat by removing the native species of plants and trees and animals and water, and you turn it into something else, green grasses and water and streets and sidewalks and rooftops, wildlife can't live there. And that's the problem with wildlife declining, and that's exactly why we see bats declining as well. So yes, they used to live everywhere in Florida in trees, and since we've been developing most of Florida over the last 100 years or so, we've seen a serious decline in bat populations, which is why today the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission protects all bat species in Florida. It is illegal to harm or kill a bat for any reason. I don't care what the reason is. If I find out you've injured, killed, or harmed a bat, I'm going to turn you in. I will tell you to your face. I am tired. After 9 years of protected status, we still see tens of thousands of bats being illegally killed all over Florida, still, after almost 10 years of protection. It's inexcusable. There's no reason for it. So we want to make sure everybody understands that there are stiff and severe fines and penalties in place. And some of the biggest offenders, believe it or not, are commercial buildings and the commercial building industry. Apartment complexes, condominium complexes with the management companies. They are always trying to fly under the radar. And it's a very serious problem. So if you live in a condominium or you live in an apartment complex and you suspect there may be bats there, please mention to your HOA board or your management company that bats are protected. They are protected wildlife. It's not legal to kill them. Okay? Now, bat houses have been around for just about 100 years, not quite. This is one of the first bat houses ever, so far as we know, ever to be built in Florida. It's the Perky Bat Tower. It was built in 1928 on Sugarloaf Key. A man who lived down there and owned part of that key actually had a fish camp, but he couldn't get people to come down there and fish because the insects would carry you away. I mean, there were just massive mosquitoes and lots of problems with insects. So he had heard that there was this guy named Clyde Perky who lived up in New Jersey who had developed and designed a pattern for a bat house that was untried and untested, but he was just sure that bats would live in it. So Perky came down and built this tower. He also built several others around the country. There's 2 or 3 of them in Texas. There's the Temple Terrace Bat Tower, which was North Tampa, was originally a Perky Bat Tower. It's gone now, only the foundation remains. And this one was the last one in Florida that was surviving. The guy that owns the fish camp spent $10,000 in 1928 for this tower. That's a lot of money. 1928 was right at the time of the Depression. The 1929 stock market crash. I mean, this was a whole bunch of money. This was a bucket full of money for a guy to spend on something like this that was untested. And after about 6 weeks, when no bats showed up, the owner of the fish camp decided to get a few of his buddies together with their boats, and I'm sure there was a little alcohol involved. They got on their boats and blasted across the Straits of Florida to Cuba, where they invaded one of the bat caves and gathered up all of the bats, 10,000 or more bats, put them all in gunny sacks. It was during the day, so the bats were sleeping. They were easy to handle. They just started shoveling them into gunny sacks. And they brought all those bats back with them, and they stuffed them all by bare hands. Nobody got rabies. They stuffed them all back up into this tower as far up as they could reach. They had all these bats up in there. And that evening, they all congregated and met all around the tower here. 1928. Can you imagine at sunset? And the mosquitoes and the bugs everywhere, and they're standing there waiting for these bats to emerge. And they did. These 10,000 bats emerged in a mass, like it just blackened the sky. There were bats everywhere, swirling in circles all around the tower. And everybody was high-fiving and cranked up, and they were all excited about the fact that they had finally figured out a way to solve the mosquito problem. And all these bats made a beautiful, big, circling sweep over the top of the bat tower and headed due south right back to Cuba and were never seen again. And of course, the reason for that is because you can't force a bat to live where they want to live. Bats are like us. They want to pick their own turf. They're not territorial, they're not aggressive, but they like to live where they want to live. And this is one of the reasons that it's been so difficult for all this last 100 years to figure out a bat house design that actually is attractive to bats and bats will use. And we finally, about 20 years ago, after 30 years of field research and lots of failures, were able to crack the code, and we have been developing all along for the last 20 years bat houses that are incredibly successful. Like the one up here in the front in the chair that you can't really see yet. A bat house that size right there will hold 350 of Florida's native insect-eating bats. It does not have to be a big bat house to be effective. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about here in a minute once we get done with this part. Unfortunately, Hurricane Irma swept through the Keys. This key was just completely swept over by the storm surge. The Perky Bat Tower was knocked off its foundations and is now lying on its side. So there is some local interest by some of the old native conchs down there and other people that were like devotees to the bat tower for some one reason or another that want to kind of put some money together and rebuild it and renovate it and put it back up. I don't know how far they've gotten. It's a lot of money to do it. But it is sort of a historical monument in many ways. It's a testament to the intelligence of bats and the ignorance of throwing money after something like this that wasn't well researched. So it is kind of an interesting story. Now, here we go. Now, there's no doubt that big bat houses make a big statement. There's a couple of them that we've got right here.